Hey there, folks. Zane from the Infinite Jukebox, aka the #1 dying fetus fan, here with another album review, and today I wanted to talk about the new Brodequin record, Harbinger of Woe. Look, man, even ignoring that this album is really great, that is one of the coolest titles that we've gotten out of metal this year so far. I mean, come on, Harbinger of Woe, that's rad as hell. Brodequin is one of those bands that, despite being great, never really seemed like they would come back in full form with their last proper studio album coming out all the way back in 2004, 20 years ago. And while they never fully disappeared via side projects or maybe even the occasional appearance with an EP, it kind of felt like the band, who are cult favorites to say the least within the brutal death metal scene, were never really going to be the kind of group to, stylistically at least, return to a full-length studio album. The kind of band that would maybe now and again release an EP here or there when they felt like it, but it just never seemed like they were going to really make a proper comeback in the traditional sense of the term. Because, I mean, come on, with an entire 2 decades having passed since 2004's Methods of Execution, a fairly polarizing record even within their fan base, I don't think that it was too shocking for a long time, at least, to say that the band was probably just going to put out an EP here or there and never really put out any record that was something meatier for their fan base to really sink their teeth into. And now myself and anyone else who ever said that looks incredibly stupid, because here we are with their first studio album in 20 years, Harbinger of Woe. I would be furious at Brodequin if it weren't for the fact that this album is probably their best album to date, because I may have looked like an idiot towards everyone that I said they were never going to drop another album to, but I'm happy to be wrong when it is at this degree of quality. Again, it may very well be the best thing that they've ever put out. Harbinger of Woe, the group's first studio album in a full 20 years, is a record that is extremely brutal, it's devastating, and even if you don't believe that it's their best album to date, which completely understandable, I do think it's at least fair to say that at the very least, this rivals their original run of records in terms of pure creative energy and in terms of pure brutality. The riffs throughout Harbinger of Woe are as devastating as they possibly could be in every way that they possibly could be, but that's kind of to be expected from a band whose legacy is partly based around being too extreme for even some of the biggest die-hard extreme metal fans out there, and for fans of adjacent genres from death metal and brutal death metal, but nonetheless, it is a very welcome quality about a record that, well, frankly, you would want to be as brutal as it is. If anything, I would say that the brutality of the guitar work on this record is particularly impressive, not just because of what it is, which is very impressive guitar work, but also because of the fact that they are so seamlessly able to transition themselves into this creative mindset in the modern day 2 decades after their last full-length studio album, where you can find in this record riffs that are just as, if not at times, heavier than riffs that they were putting out decades ago. It feels almost baffling that a band that were, for the most part at least, and completely in terms of full-length studio albums, dormant for an extended period of time, quite an extended period of time at that, can just get back into the studio and come across like not only nothing happened, but that they may very well be better than they ever were before. It's genuinely baffling at times. Tracks like Tenailment feature nearly grindcore levels of ferocity at times, kind of going into that more death grind, death metal, grindcore fusion realm of things for sure, before kicking into some slower and sludgier, but still definitely fast and nowhere near doom metal levels of riffage that I think would make bands like Cattle Decapitation and more popular death grind kind of bands out there blush in terms of just sheer heaviness alone. I think that Mike Bailey does an amazing job as a guitarist for this band on this record in particular. He's always been a talented dude, no question, but I think that he really shines on this album now that we've got some amazing production work going on here, and he's able to really experiment with the pure violence in his own performance work, ultimately leading to an album that I think highlights some of the best guitar work that you can find in the year in metal so far. His work as guitarist never feels sloppy or thrown together for the sake of speed, which is certainly something that a lot of bands within the realm of more brutal metal can honestly kind of lean towards a little bit here or there. And there are plenty of times, there are Harbinger of Woe, where he creates memorable riffs, memorable little passages, just small details that he adds to his work to ensure that every single song has its own unique personality in regards to the guitar performances that are found on it. Yet at the same time, he never sacrifices the overall vicious quality of the record that it often needs to succeed. I mean, through and through, no matter how much I can talk about the smaller embellishments found on this record, this is still a brutal death metal album. It's still an album that you would want to be heavy, that you would want to be disgustingly thick in terms of guitar work and bass and overall atmosphere. And I mean, for what it's worth, this is still Brodequin. It's not like this is some new realm of or new territory that the band are kind of going in here. Sure, this is what they've done in the past, no question. It's just that it's what they've done in the past, maybe even heavier than it's ever been before. My point is, the guitar work throughout Harbinger of Woe may be some of the most explosive, maybe some of the most dense guitar work that Mike Bailey has ever laid down for this band. Behind the mic, while also taking over bass duties, is Jamie Bailey, who kind of interestingly provides a sort of low-end role in both respects. I mean, that's pretty much expected for bass, especially bass within the context of death metal or extreme metal in general, but I think it's really interesting how he almost provides more of a textural role in terms of his vocal performances, though that's certainly not a bad thing. I actually think it adds a pretty unique flair to this album. Due to the nature in which this album is mixed and produced, the former of which engineer Josh Wellman does an amazing job with, I would like to clarify, it does feel like Jamie Bailey's vocals are, like I said, more textural, more bass-like in nature, kind of a background instrument that nonetheless feels integral towards the overall heaviness and structure of the record. And I think that's a pretty understandable criticism for some. I can completely see why some people would not click with that, think that that was a poor creative decision, wishing that Bailey's vocals were maybe just a bit higher in the mix, or maybe just a bit clearer in general. But at the same time, I do think it's undeniable that the addition of his vocals as more of a background presence, more of an underlining kind of quality about this record, ultimately makes it in a way. I'm not necessarily saying this record wouldn't be heavy without his vocals being provided in the manner in which they are. It would still be a heavy album because this is Brodequin. Of course it's going to be a heavy album. But I really do think that his vocals being placed in a manner where they feel more atmospheric and more devastating than they would be if they were right at the front of the pack here instrumentally, I think it was a great choice. Jamie Bailey also plays a more traditional role in terms of low-end performances with the aforementioned bass work, and in that regard, he is more than solid. I don't necessarily go into a death metal record expecting for absolutely stunning bass work. Even as a bassist, I recognize that going into a death metal album, that's not really the thing to expect per se, but I do feel like his performances here, although very nuanced, are, again, integral towards the overall structure of the record, the heaviness of the album. I think that his bass work here adds a ton of weight, a ton of density to kind of make it into this disgustingly heavy album that it at times can often be, and in that regard, I think he provides a great role as well. He is a vocalist first and foremost, at least in terms of his performance work on this album and what you will take note of first, but still, bass work, really strong. I also think that the manner in which some of the occasional backing vocals are kind of added in, sort of layered in, adds this very nice sense of atmosphere at times almost, kind of like how the album opening track, Diabolical Edict, kicks things off with these wails and screams that really do build up some degree of pressure in the album despite being in the background, especially because they sound very genuine. They're coming straight from a torture chamber circa the French Revolution roundabout, and for that I absolutely love it. I think that a lot of these smaller details like those here are kind of what make this album and really define just how much passion obviously went into making such a phenomenal comeback album for Brodequin. Last but not least, rounding out the trio, you have Brennan Shackelford, whose drumming I honestly think provides the raw kind of sensibilities that Harbinger of Woe needs to survive and to thrive. In fact, I would actually argue that even though you may not really notice his presence a ton upon first listen, he is arguably the single most essential member of the album in terms of how it manages to succeed as a genuinely heavy and raw record. Now, I would like to say that's not me insulting the Baileys' performance work on here or anything like that. They both sound amazing. They both have a degree of precision, yet at the same time, the heaviness and the rawness of their own respective performances is pretty flawless overall, and generally speaking, it's what you would expect from them based on their past works, but at the same time, maybe cranked up a notch or two. However, Brendan Shackelford's drum work here is just that much more energetic, just that much more garagey, and I really feel like he ends up defining the record in terms of quality and in terms of style, really providing a huge amount of substance to an album that I think would sorely miss him if he was not present. Now, I do want to clarify, I'm not saying that his percussion work here is sloppy or anything like that. It is absolutely not in any way whatsoever. I just mean to say that his tone of the drum work here, I really feel like it adds a certain crunch to this album that it would lack without his presence, without his performance work, and Harbinger of Woe is better with him attached to it than it would be with any drummer that this band has had in the past. And with Shackelford being the most recently added member of the band, there is an argument to be made that the sort of fresh presence, the fresh blood that he adds to this record definitely is part of what keeps it feeling lively. Not to say it wouldn't with any other drummer, but I really do feel like his, again, very garage-like kind of presence here kind of keeps this rooted towards the very early kind of rawness of Brodequin, while also simultaneously allowing his cohorts to shine in their own way, ensuring it doesn't feel like a repeat of any prior records from the band. And I think as a whole, he's really demonstrated that he is a worthy member of this project by now. I mean, he proved himself capable in 2021 on Perpetuation of Suffering. That was the EP that they dropped that year with 2 songs that eventually made their way onto this record. But I think that a lot of moments here where Shackelford really shines come in these smaller passages, like the kick drums in places like Maleficium, or the kind of ending moments of the track Suffocation of Ash towards the back half of the record. It's these moments where he just adds this extra degree of power, this extra degree of punch to the record that I feel would, again, severely be lacking with any drummer that would be less willing to go the extra mile and add that extra bit of heaviness to the album. Basically, what I'm saying is that he's been in this band for like a handful of years at this point, and it feels like he's been here since the start, and that's a good thing. Look, A Harbinger of Woe has no right to be as good as it actually is. I mean, from a logical standpoint, from a statistical standpoint, metal bands making comeback albums full decades after their so-called golden years has not resulted in the best material. Generally speaking, it results in albums that are weaker, or at the very least weak in comparison to their best material. But here we have Brodequin doing the near impossible and making a record 20 years after their last full-length studio album that not only manages to equal and generally rival their best material from their original run, I would say it even outclasses some of their best works, maybe making for their best album to date. This may be the best return from a noteworthy metal band after a multi-decade hiatus after Satan's comeback with Life Sentence in 2013, and that is a very specific category, I know, but just trust me on this one, when it does happen, it usually doesn't turn out great. At the very least, this is one of the best albums, comeback albums, from any older death metal band at this point that we've seen in a fair amount of time, I would say. I mean, I don't expect any other maybe 20-plus-year-old metal band to put out anything nearly as good as this record at this point. And I'm not necessarily saying that because I think other bands are incapable of doing music like this multiple decades into their career. I just mean to say that this album is so good that I don't see Brodequin and any of their peers achieving this level of quality. This is a genuinely fantastic record. Look, I'm not gonna be here saying things like, oh, Harbinger of Woe isn't for the faint of heart, because that's corny and that's dumb, and why would I do that? I'm not some metal YouTube channel who's gonna try and overhype every single guttural death metal album I come across. That being said, I really do think that this is an album that is heavier than most metal out there right now, and the fact that it's by a band that has been around for several decades at this point is absolutely mind-blowing. But, I mean, hey, then again, Judas Priest dropped one of their best albums in general earlier this year, so anything's possible now, I guess. Please don't yell at me in the comments for bringing up Judas Priest during a Brodequin review. I won't do it again, I promise. In all seriousness, though, I do think it's fair to say that this is one of the heavier death metal albums to gain any real traction within recent months, and hey, I am extremely glad that it's getting the attention that it is within underground and alternative metal circles, because this album definitely deserves it. I'm going to give this record 4 stars out of 5. And with that being said, that's the end of this album review. I've been Zane from the Infinite Jukebox. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.